I wanted to find out who Maxwell really was and how he'd built such an empire. You know, Maxwell was keen to let everyone know he was a decorated war hero. But his life in post-war Berlin is where things got very shady. He runs a very, very lucrative black market operation, buying and selling cigarettes and nylons and all chewing gum, food, everything. He is the heart of taking goods from zone to zone and putting the cash in his pockets. And Maxwell was someone who wants power, who wants influence, who wants wealth, who wants to change the world. He goes across the Russians, declares himself, gets on very well with them, and establishes good connections. He becomes a KGB agent.
Maxwell was a special person. He was received in our highest spheres. In our parlance, it was called an useful official relation. So that meant that a foreigner can be useful to us as a person who would have an access to some information and who would willingly or unwillingly share it with us.
Good evening. Later tonight, we'll be profiling the Romanian-born violinist. His death last November led to widespread criticism of the media for not investigating his activities while he was still alive. The truth was, though, that there was no shortage of journalists investigating Maxwell. The problem was how far he let them get. Because over the years, Maxwell, with the help of an army of lawyers, had perfected a method of gagging potential critics by his blanket use of the libel laws. In effect, he used the law to censor the media. Francis Wheen, who himself tangled with Robert Maxwell over a Late Show item shown 2 years ago, explains, with the help of lawyers and journalists, just how Maxwell did it and what it felt like to be on the receiving end of one of those writs.
Robert Maxwell was a man of voracious appetite, but he didn't have much of an appetite for the Late Show. He was especially annoyed by a programme in 1990 where I drew attention to his connections with East European dictators, like Erich Honecker.
I complained to Michael Checkland, the Director General, and he fairly says, "I'm sorry you were distressed by Francis Wheen's item on the Late Show on the 17th of January. I don't believe the item went beyond proper bounds, but I've passed your letter to Michael Jackson, the program editor. He'll be writing to you shortly to explore the possibility of inviting you to appear on the program to answer this piece."
Maxwell saw himself as a great communicator. His business empire included newspapers, magazines, publishing houses and television companies. So, of course, he was a champion of journalistic freedom.
We are the fourth estate. The press cannot be gagged or muzzled.
It was very hard to reconcile his role as the publisher of national newspapers, to whom intrusion is a daily part of life, and his own role as a champion of the right to information, with the headlong charge he would take into litigation the moment somebody said something or read something, somebody went on television and criticized him, he would immediately say, "See what a writ will do."
While he was busy monitoring Tom Bower's lunches, maybe he should have kept a closer eye on one of his own executives, Peter Thompson, who, having left Maxwell's employ, co-wrote an alternative unauthorized biography. This book annoyed him even more than Bower's.
The book came out in February, and Maxwell was on his boat, the Lady Ghislaine, in the Caribbean, and it came as something of a surprise to his people in London. It suddenly arrived. They heard the book was out in the shops, and half a dozen copies were quickly dispatched to the office, to Mirror Group newspapers, and it was faxed page by page to Robert Maxwell on his yacht. It took them most of the night to do it, and of course he was getting increasingly annoyed as he was reading each page as it came off the fax.
As soon as they felt the full wrath of Robert Maxwell, the publishers retreated. They promised to withdraw the book and remove all the so-called libels. The two authors didn't have much choice but to go along with this deal.
The writs were coming in at the rate of 3 or 4 a day. In the end, there was a total of 30 writs, and a judge had to set a deadline for the number of writs to come in. I spoke to Tony Delano, and he said, if we don't sign, the book is probably dead. This way we get a paperback out. So I agreed to the out-of-court settlement. He didn't like anything about the KGB. He didn't like any suggestion that he was a dishonest businessman. He didn't like any suggestion that he was deceitful. He felt that this would damage himself and his companies. And we amended the text, and in fact we were able to include and update certain things because we were having a go at a new version of the book.
The new version was published. Maxwell still wasn't happy.
The publishers rang me and said, "You won't believe this, but he's issued another injunction." And the publishers had in fact included on the back cover of the book a short piece saying that this was the almost complete story of Robert Maxwell. And he argued that this meant that what had been left out of the book would be the complete story, and therefore we were saying that what had been cut out was in fact true, which he said was a breach of the legal agreement.
20 miles outside Sofia, on the road to the house that Maxwell bought, the grandest modern property in all Bulgaria. But to many ordinary people, this building, Bitsistra, is a symbol of the unholy partnership between Maxwell and the communists. The partners may have made millions, but now Bulgaria wants its money back.
I always was suspicious about the Maxwell operations in Bulgaria. It was clear that his operations was especially designed to use the communist corruption, the communist rulers' corruption, the communist interests in the Western world in order to get benefits.
Do you think his operations were illegal?
Yes.
The capitalist meets the communist, despots both.
Please take a seat, Mr. Maxwell.
Todor Zhivkov, who ran Bulgaria with a whip hand for 45 years, became close to Robert Maxwell during the 1980s. While others shied away from one of Eastern Europe's most hard-line regimes, Maxwell thrived. He did so by slavishly praising the dictator.
It's an indication, Mr. President, of your continued popularity. Your popularity is as good as your health.
In 1981, Todor Zhivkov's great thoughts were published in English, courtesy of Robert Maxwell's Pergamon Press. This somewhat difficult book included a foreword by Maxwell himself. He writes of Bulgaria as a prosperous and happy nation under the leadership of the Communist Party and its General Secretary, Todor Zhivkov. It was a big lie, but Maxwell was now in business with the Communists, a relationship which was mutually beneficial. Maxwell simply worked on with different communists. Nothing really changed until the end of 1990, when the regime was finally toppled. Suddenly, for Robert Maxwell, Bulgaria was a different proposition. For more than a year now, the prosecuting authorities here in the Bulgarian capital, Sofia, have been conducting a criminal investigation into the financial affairs of the old communist regime. They're seeking to apportion blame for what's universally known as the economic catastrophe, the crippling $11 billion foreign debt. It's a huge and complex inquiry into a tangled web of international financial deals. They want to know where the money went. One name they keep on coming across is that of Robert Maxwell. Newsnight has obtained a copy of the contract for the sale of Bitsistra. It's dated the 6th of April 1990. It shows Maxwell paid the communists 6,078,000 leva. That's about £150,000 for a 50-year lease. Robert Maxwell's signature appears on the final page. The contract was ratified by the government, the Ministerial Council, in a document on the 21st of May. This shows the property wasn't just cheap. Maxwell could also enjoy tax-free profits for 5 years. In the eyes of the new non-communist government, the deal is highly suspicious.
It is very astonishing that, first of all, the government chose Maxwell, because normally in this country, when we proceed to such projects, you have an auction, first. And second, the price is ridiculous. The price is, let me say, 10 times less than the real price.
On Friday, the Bitsistra deal goes to Sofia's Central Court. The new government are determined to have the contracts nullified, and their investigators are now trying to unravel all the deals involving Robert Maxwell.
In connection with Robert Maxwell, we have no evidence that he committed criminal offences in Bulgaria. But this will be a question which will be discussed in the next few days by the Bulgarian Minister of Finance and by the Interior Minister. In the end, they will see whether there is any evidence of criminal activity at all. If there is, the inquiry will be widened, and we would expect the English authorities to help us in our investigations.
The head of Bulgaria's Parliamentary Economic Commission is already demanding an explanation for another Maxwell deal. Arsen Michkovsky believes the communists used Maxwell to spirit millions of dollars abroad. According to Arsen Michkovsky, document 63 of Bulgaria's Foreign Currency Committee shows that on April the 24th, 1988, a group of ministers decided in secret to send money abroad by investing up to $200 million in shares through Britain. The middleman for the deal was Robert Maxwell. He was to get double the commission the Bulgarians normally paid. The reason, according to the document, was payment for the risk he was taking. The company through which the money was to be invested was the Maxwell-controlled London and Bishopsgate International Investment Management, PLC.
The decision was made to invest up to $200 million from the Bulgarian Strategic Currency Reserve. The first tranche of this investment amounted to $50 million. Provision was also made so that no further decision was needed for more investments of 50 or 100 million. What I can say for sure, and I have evidence to prove this, is that the initial 50 million was definitely invested. What happened to the rest of the money is difficult for me to say because all the documents are still being kept secret.
The deal says Maxwell was taking a risk, but what risk? What risk was he taking?
Mr. Maxwell, in fact, didn't take any kind of risk at all, because he was a major shareholder in the Bishopsgate Company, and because it wasn't his money, he was investing anyway. And we know he was given this higher commission rate, twice the normal.
Revelations about Bitsistra and now the currency deals have left a cloud over all Maxwell's business affairs in Bulgaria. The problem is no one in the new government is sure what exactly he did own. His negotiations to buy a giant printing works from the communists were stopped when the old regime fell. But he'd already bought a major share in the Balkan film industry and in computing. Intriguingly, he also co-founded a new bank, which is reportedly being used by Bulgaria's leading arms trader. But equally interesting are the deals which apparently didn't come off. For example, his aborted plan to invest heavily in a resort on the Black Sea. He signed a large cheque for this, one of a number he apparently handed over for deals which never happened. So what was going on?
It's very strange, and we have information that some of the checks amounted of £1 million. And, of course, we are very suspicious, and we think that this is a way of laundering money from UK or from the United States and so on.
So you're saying that Maxwell signed checks?
Yes.
For deals that were never done?
Yes.
What do you believe happened to that money?
I have no strict evidence because this is the bank secrecy, of course, as in other countries. But it seems to me that this money came in Bulgaria and then was transferred to another country or to another banking account, and that's the laundering of money.
Whatever the truth, it won't be found here in what were Communist Party headquarters. Security sources say that a mysterious fire just after the demise of the regime destroyed valuable evidence. But what of the personalities from the old party? Shivkov himself, seen here at the front at a final party congress, said he'd only speak to us if we paid him a minimum of $5,000. Further along the front row is Ognian Doinov, a former Politburo member the Bulgarian authorities would like to interview. But Mr. Doinov has now moved from the heart of Bulgarian politics. Today he lives in an apartment in central London. We saw him yesterday as he left for his work about 2 miles away. For Mr. Doinoff has an office on the 5th floor of Maxwell House. For the past year, he's been employed in Maxwell Communication Corporation's international section. Mr. Doinoff told me he doesn't want to be interviewed by Newsnight because he doesn't want to get involved in British or Bulgarian politics. He was initially hired by Robert Maxwell as Maxwell's advisor on African affairs, although he says he now concerns himself with Eastern Europe. Exactly what influence a former member of a reviled Politburo can now have on the non-communist governments of Eastern Europe is difficult to imagine. But Mr. Doinoff describes his salary as attractive. It's in excess of £100,000 a year. And, as he puts it, the work is clean. Back in Sofia, the communists, who now call themselves socialists, are making their last stand. They're protesting at a new law which will mean the party has to surrender all its property, buildings the communists themselves confiscated as much as 50 years ago. So the old biters are to be bit.